The smell of earth and starch filled the air at King Cullen Supermarket in West Babylon, Long Island, that Saturday morning in 1977. Housewives in pastel coats pushed rattling carts down aisles lined with canned soup and detergent, while a radio hummed soft pop tunes from a corner speaker. Nothing about that day seemed extraordinary, until the potatoes began whispering threats. It started with Margaret Hale, a schoolteacher's wife and mother of two, who reached into a sack of russet potatoes, looking for the firmest ones. Her fingers brushed against something dry and foreign, a small folded note, tucked between the tubers. She frowned, expecting a coupon or a store flyer. But when she unfolded it, she found 4 words printed in jagged black ink. Some of these are poisoned. At first, she laughed softly, a nervous, incredulous sound. But the handwriting was too deliberate, the words too sharp. She felt her stomach tighten. The note smelled faintly of ink and something chemical, like bleach. "Excuse me," she called to the produce clerk, her voice trembling. "Someone left this in the potatoes." The young clerk, who'd been stacking onions, frowned and wiped his hands on his apron. When he read the note, his face drained of color. Within minutes, the manager was summoned. The note was placed in a plastic sandwich bag and taken to the back office. Someone called the police. By the time 2 Nassau County patrolmen arrived, a small crowd had gathered near the produce aisle. Whispers swirled: poisoned potatoes, a prank, the mafia, the Russians. Shoppers clutched their groceries like life rafts. Officer Daniels, the taller of the two, studied the note with a grim expression. "Could be a hoax," he muttered. "Could be something worse," said his partner, folding his arms. "Let's get the feds involved. People start thinking their food's poisoned, it'll be chaos." By afternoon, the FBI field office in Manhattan had a faxed copy of the note. And they didn't like what they saw. Because this wasn't the first. Earlier that week, 2 similar letters had been mailed to major food distributors across Long Island. Each one demanded money, small amounts at first, $5,000 here, $10,000 there. But the wording was nearly identical: if payment is not received, potatoes will be poisoned and sold to stores. No one had taken it seriously, until now. The FBI dispatched Special Agent Robert Keene, a measured man with a square jaw and a habit of rubbing his temples when irritated. He arrived at King Cullen that evening, rainwater dripping from his trench coat. The store was closed, police tape across the doors. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered over rows of produce that now looked sinister in their ordinariness. Keene held the bagged note up to the light. "No fingerprints?" "Just smudges," the local sergeant replied. "Looks like the guy used gloves." "Any tampering with the potatoes themselves?" "None we can see. But we sent a few to the lab, just in case." Keene nodded. "Let's keep this quiet for now. Last thing we need is the press turning this into another Tylenol circus." He didn't know that within 24 hours, he'd lose that battle. That night, Newsday ran a small piece on page 3. FBI investigates possible potato poison threat on Long Island. It was meant to be discreet. Instead, it ignited a wildfire. By morning, phones rang off the hook at police precincts and grocery stores alike. Dozens claimed to have found strange potatoes, ones that looked too smooth, too wet, too light. Housewives demanded refunds. A rumor spread that a child in Huntington had been hospitalized after eating mashed potatoes. It wasn't true, but truth mattered little when fear was cheap and contagious. At FBI headquarters, Keene stared at a map of Long Island dotted with red pins marking every reported incident. His assistant, Agent Linda Shore, flipped through a folder. "These letters," she said, "are written on standard office paper. Cheap typewriter. No fingerprints, no distinct watermarks." Keene sighed. "So he's careful. Or he works somewhere that gives him access to packaging," she replied. "The notes talk about shipments, distribution routes, details only an insider would know." Keene tapped his pen against his notepad. "Someone in the food business, maybe fired recently. Knows the system, wants revenge." Linda nodded. "Or attention." That afternoon, another note arrived, this time sent directly to a local newspaper. It read, "This is not a hoax. You will pay $50,000 by Friday or the potatoes will flow through every home in Long Island. Children will die first. You cannot stop it." The editors called the FBI immediately. Keene stared at the letter for a long time. There was something performative about it, almost theatrical. Whoever wrote it wanted to be seen, to make the world tremble. But something else caught his attention, a faint smudge on the corner of the page that looked like grease, food grease. He ordered the lab to test it. The preliminary results came back the next morning, vegetable oil and soil consistent with potato handling. The writer wasn't bluffing. That realization sent a chill through the bureau. If the man truly had access to produce shipments, thousands could be at risk before anyone even knew. By Wednesday, FBI agents were stationed in supermarkets across Suffolk and Nassau counties, disguised as customers. Laboratory chemists tested random samples from shelves. Local news anchors, trying to calm the storm, only made it worse. Officials say there's no confirmed poisoning, one anchor said solemnly, but the FBI advises caution. That one word, caution, was enough. People stopped buying potatoes altogether. Produce aisles were ghost towns. Farmers panicked. Grocery chains demanded answers. And in a small rented apartment above a laundromat in Hicksville, a man watched the chaos unfold on his black and white television, grinning faintly as he peeled a potato with surgical precision. He dropped the skin into a bowl and whispered, almost lovingly, "See? They're already afraid." The camera of imagination lingers on the man's face, calm, clever, unremarkable. A ghost in a world of panic. Outside, rain begins to fall again, drumming softly against the window. The man lights a cigarette, exhales slowly, and types another letter, his hands steady, methodical. He pauses, smirks, and types the final line before sealing the envelope. If fear is my poison, then Long Island has already taken the first bite. And just like that, the FBI's long, strange war against the potato poisoner had begun. By dawn the next morning, the FBI's Manhattan field office was drowning in paper, reports from grocers, hysterical phone calls, and new letters arriving by the hour. Each note bore the same mechanical typewriter font, the same promise of destruction. The media had nicknamed him the Potato Poisoner. Special Agent Robert Keene hated that name. "Makes him sound like some cartoon villain," he muttered, rubbing his temples as another envelope was slid across his desk. But whoever he is, he's not laughing. The letter had been mailed from Hempstead, addressed to a major distributor that supplied over half of Long Island supermarkets. The demand was clear. $100,000 in small bills. Leave it in locker 217 at the Hicksville train station by Friday midnight. Or the poison goes national. This wasn't about potatoes anymore. It was about fear as currency. Agent Linda Shore leaned over the desk, reading silently. He's escalating. Either he's desperate, or he's enjoying the attention. Keene sighed. Maybe both. Forensic teams had confirmed no chemical contamination in any tested potatoes so far. No cyanide, no arsenic, no foreign residue. But that didn't matter. The idea of poison was enough to curdle an entire island's appetite. Across town, in a Long Island suburb with tidy lawns and peeling fences, Charles Renner sat at his kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee and yesterday's newspaper. His hands trembled slightly as he scanned the headlines, FBI, Potato Poisoner may strike again. He smirked. May strike again? They make it sound like I ever stopped. His wife, Janice, entered the kitchen in her robe. You're up early. Couldn't sleep, he said, folding the paper. Janice eyed him suspiciously. You've been acting strange, Charlie. All those late-night drives, the cash missing from the drawer, what's going on? Just job hunting, he lied smoothly. Someone's gotta pay the bills since Shopmart canned me. Maybe if you hadn't yelled at your boss, she shot back, we wouldn't be in this mess. He smiled without humor. Maybe if my boss hadn't treated me like garbage, I wouldn't have to teach the whole industry a lesson. Janice froze, uncertain whether he was joking. Before she could ask, he kissed her on the forehead and left, humming under his breath. Back at FBI headquarters, the task force, now unofficially called Operation Spud Shield, had begun analyzing patterns. The letters all passed through mail sorting centers near major produce distributors. The paper stock matched invoices used by a chain of grocery warehouses. Someone who had once handled produce shipments clearly knew their logistics. We're dealing with someone who used to work the system, Linda said during the briefing. He knows the timing, the routes, the weak spots. He's not poisoning the potatoes, he's poisoning confidence. The agents exchanged grim looks. Keene pointed to a map of Long Island covered in red string and pushpins. He's using the mail as his megaphone. But sooner or later, he'll want to see the panic firsthand. We set a trap. By midweek, Long Island had become a portrait of collective paranoia. Housewives refused to shop alone. Restaurants pulled mashed potatoes from menus. Farmers began dumping unsold produce into landfills, unable to move shipments. News anchors warned citizens not to overreact, while their editors quietly instructed cameramen to film the emptiest aisles they could find. And the letters kept coming. One was addressed to the New York Times. Your readers trust you. Tell them not to buy potatoes until the government pays up. Tell them the FBI is lying. Another was mailed to a children's hospital. Even your kitchens are not safe. The words were cruelly efficient, calculated to spark chaos without a single act of violence. At FBI headquarters, Keene slammed the latest letter down. He's taunting us. Linda studied the postmark. Hicksville again. Same general area. Stake out every mailbox within 5 miles. I want eyes on every drop. She hesitated. That's hundreds of mailboxes, Robert. He met her gaze. Then start counting. That night, in a dim diner off Sunrise Highway, a man matching Renner's description sipped black coffee and scribbled on a napkin. The waitress glanced at him curiously. You're here a lot lately, she said lightly. He smiled thinly. I like watching people panic on the news. She laughed awkwardly, not sure if it was a joke. When she turned away, he pocketed the napkin and dropped a quarter on the counter, exact change, no tip. Outside, rain streaked the windows. He walked to a public mailbox, slipped an envelope inside, and disappeared into the darkness. Thursday morning brought another surprise. A new letter arrived at a different FBI field office, this one in Washington, D.C. The writer claimed to have national reach now, threatening to poison potatoes in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. But when agents analyzed the ink, they found a peculiar signature. The ribbon ink contained a rare compound used in an obsolete Remington typewriter, last manufactured in 1963. Linda flipped through records. If we can find someone in the produce business who owned that model, we've got our man. Get me a list, Keene ordered. The search turned up one match. Charles Renner, former produce manager at Farm Fresh Distributors, fired 4 months earlier for inventory discrepancies and unprofessional conduct. Keene felt a surge of grim satisfaction. Get me his address. That afternoon, 2 agents watched Renner's small house from an unmarked car. He was pacing his living room, gesturing angrily to no one in particular. Occasionally, he'd glance out the window, as if daring them to catch him. Inside, Janice sat on the couch, twisting her wedding ring nervously. Charlie, whatever you're doing, you need to stop. The FBI's on the news every night. He stopped pacing. They're idiots. I'm smarter than them. Her eyes widened. Charlie, what did you do? He looked at her, a strange mix of pride and defiance in his eyes. Nothing yet. But they'll remember me. The next morning, the FBI raided the Renner residence. They found old produce invoices, a Remington typewriter, and stacks of envelopes, but no poison. Renner was calm, eerily so, as they cuffed him. I'm not your guy, he said. You're chasing shadows. You want poison? Look in your own warehouses. Keene frowned. What does that mean? Renner smiled faintly. You'll see. By Friday evening, Long Island supermarkets reopened under heavy FBI supervision. No new threats had arrived. Sales began to recover. The panic, it seemed, was fading. But late that night, as Keene reviewed paperwork in his office, his phone rang. Agent Keene, said the voice on the line, low and calm. You have the wrong man. Keene froze. Who is this? The voice chuckled softly. You think I'd be foolish enough to use my own typewriter? Renner's just fertilizer. The line went dead. For a long moment, Keene stared at the receiver in disbelief. Then, slowly, realization set in. Whoever was behind the letters, the real potato poisoner, was still out there. And this time, he wasn't just after money. He was after power. By the time dawn broke over Long Island that Saturday, the FBI's nerve center buzzed like a hornet's nest. Agents shuffled in with stale coffee and hollow eyes, the hum of fluorescent lights mixing with the clatter of typewriters and telephones. Special Agent Robert Keene stood before a wall-sized map of Long Island, red threads crisscrossing between supermarket chains, warehouses, and distribution centers. In bold black marker, 3 words sprawled across the top. Operation Spud Shield. It wasn't the most dignified name, but it stuck, partly because the situation had turned absurd enough to deserve it. Keene turned to the room. The phone call last night proves it. Renner isn't our man. He may have written some letters, but someone else orchestrated this. Agent Linda Shore looked up from her notes. So Renner's the patsy? Keene nodded. Or a pawn. Either way, we're treating him as bait. There was a murmur among the assembled agents. Bait wasn't a word anyone liked hearing. While Renner sat in custody, confused, furious, and occasionally smug, the FBI began deploying undercover agents across Long Island's largest supermarkets. Dressed as clerks, stock boys, and delivery drivers, they blended in among crates of vegetables and whispering customers. One agent, posing as a produce manager, found himself explaining to a panicked shopper that the potatoes were perfectly safe. She didn't buy it. Few did. The fear had evolved. It was no longer about poison, it was about control. People didn't trust their food, their government, or even the man restocking the shelves. Linda had started keeping a running tally of the chaos: grocery sales down 40%, farmers dumping tons of produce, and 2 supermarkets forced to close after receiving bomb threats. None of it real, just fear feeding on itself like rot. Keene studied the numbers. He's waging psychological warfare, he said. And he's winning. That afternoon, the Bureau received a package, no return address, postmarked from Farmingdale. Inside, wrapped in newspaper, was a single, rotten potato. Its surface was blackened and pocked with holes, the flesh eaten away. A note was taped to it. This is what happens to trust. Linda stared at it. He's mocking us. Keene nodded grimly. Or warning us. Lab tests later confirmed that the potato wasn't poisoned, it was just decomposing naturally. Still, the image hit the press like a thunderclap. Rot at the root, feds lose control of potato panic, screamed the Sunday papers. Editorial cartoons depicted Keene as a man trying to plug a leaking dam with potatoes. At a hastily convened press conference, a Department of Agriculture spokesman assured the public that no contaminated food has been found. But his forced smile only deepened suspicion. That night, the FBI's tip line received over 300 calls, ranging from supposed sightings of men with potato sacks to claims that someone was spraying fields from helicopters. Fear had become contagious, and no one was immune. Meanwhile, in a small warehouse off Route 110, a man in coveralls moved carefully among crates of produce. He checked each label, jotting notes on a clipboard. His name tag read L. Taylor. No one noticed that the clipboard was fake, or that Taylor wasn't on any payroll. He was FBI agent Marcus Hall, assigned undercover to trace the distribution network. He'd been told to look for anything unusual: mismatched invoices, tampered shipments, odd visitors after hours. Around midnight, Hall heard a sound, soft, deliberate footsteps echoing in the loading bay. He peered through a crack in the door. A shadow moved between the pallets, crouched beside a truck, and placed something underneath it. Hall's pulse quickened. He crept closer, flashlight in hand, and shouted, "FBI! Don't move!" The figure bolted. Hall gave chase, but the man vanished into the maze of crates, leaving only a dropped object behind, a small glass vial, stoppered tight and filled with a cloudy liquid. Within hours, the vial was in the FBI lab. Scientists worked feverishly, analyzing its contents. When the report came back, Keene read it twice. "It's not poison," Linda said, scanning the results over his shoulder. "It's ethylene glycol. Antifreeze." Keene frowned. "So he wants us to think he's poisoning food, but he's not actually doing it." Linda hesitated. "Or maybe he's testing our response. Seeing how far we'll go." Across town, in a cluttered motel room near Islip Airport, the real mastermind, his name still unknown, watched the news coverage with detached amusement. On the bed beside him lay a pile of letters, each one carefully typed and stamped, ready for mailing. He picked one up, reading aloud in a slow, mocking tone. "You cannot find me because you're looking in the wrong fields." He smiled, sealing the envelope. "And you always will." He wasn't just a criminal. He was conducting an experiment on fear itself. By midweek, Operation Spud Shield expanded beyond Long Island. The FBI coordinated with food distributors from New Jersey to Connecticut. Every shipment of potatoes was now tracked, every warehouse inspected. Grocery stores displayed signs assuring customers of 100% safety. It didn't matter. Sales still plummeted. Behind the scenes, tension grew between agencies. The Department of Agriculture accused the FBI of overreach. The Bureau accused the USDA of withholding data. In one heated meeting, Keene slammed a folder onto the table. People are losing jobs because of this panic. Someone has to take responsibility. A government liaison coolly replied, "Our responsibility is to prevent hysteria, Agent Keene. Not feed it." Keene shot back, "Tell that to the farmers burning their crops because no one will buy them." That night, a storm rolled across Long Island. In the flickering lights of the FBI command post, Linda found Keene staring at a wall of photos, Renner, the letters, the potato, the map. "You look like hell," she said gently. He didn't look up. "You ever feel like you're chasing a ghost?" "Every day." Keene rubbed his face. "He's too smart. He doesn't care about the money. This is personal." Linda hesitated. "You think he's targeting you?" He met her eyes. "No. He's targeting trust itself." Before she could reply, a young agent burst in, breathless. "Sir, we've got another one, new letter, dropped at a post office in Queens." Keene snatched the envelope. Inside, typed in the same cold, mechanical font, were just 5 words. Renter was never alone in this. Linda frowned. "Renter?" Keene shook his head slowly. "No. Renner. It's a typo. Or maybe a clue." He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Get me the visitor logs from Renner's workplace. Anyone who left before or after him." As she hurried off, Keene read the letter again, his gut twisting. Whoever wrote it was watching them closely, maybe even inside the investigation. He placed the letter down beside the map. "Operation Spud Shield," he muttered bitterly. "Looks like the shield's got a hole in it." Outside, thunder cracked over Long Island, and somewhere in the distance, a mailbox clanged shut. The next wave had just begun. Charles Renner sat in a gray interrogation room, his fingers drumming an uneven rhythm on the table. The room smelled faintly of metal and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with the dull persistence of a hangover. He had been there for 6 hours. 6 hours of waiting, 6 hours of silence, and 6 hours of staring at the one-way mirror, knowing full well someone was on the other side, watching, judging, deciding. He didn't mind. He liked being watched. When the door finally opened, Special Agent Robert Keene walked in, carrying a slim folder and the weight of a man who'd missed too many nights of sleep. He dropped the folder on the table, pulled out a chair, and sat opposite Renner. "You've had time to think," Keene said quietly. "Want to tell me why you did it?" Renner smirked. "Did what, exactly? Buy groceries? Use a typewriter?" Keene opened the folder. Inside were copies of letters, each one stamped and sealed, typed in the same cold mechanical font. "You recognize these?" "Sure," Renner said. "They're in the papers. Seems whoever's writing them has a flair for drama." Keene leaned forward. "We found the same model typewriter in your house." Renner raised an eyebrow. "You mean the one I've had for 15 years? You think I planned an entire criminal enterprise on the same machine I used to type my resume?" Keene's jaw tightened. "You're a former produce manager. You had access to the distribution system. You were fired for embezzlement." "Alleged," Renner corrected smoothly. "Fine. Alleged. You had motive, opportunity, and knowledge. Sounds like you to me." Renner's smile widened, but his eyes stayed cold. "Agent Keene, you ever wonder why people fear poison so much?" Keene said nothing. "Because you can't see it," Renner went on, his tone soft and measured. "You can't smell it, can't taste it, can't fight it. It hides in plain sight. Like mistrust. Once it's there, it spreads faster than disease. You don't have to kill anyone to destroy them. Just make them afraid to eat dinner." Keene studied him for a long moment. "You sound proud." Renner shrugged. "I sound right." Outside the interrogation room, Agent Linda Shore watched through the glass. "He's performing," she said. "He wants to be understood, not caught." Keene nodded grimly. "Yeah. But what if he's not performing? What if he's just another messenger? Linda frowned. You think there's someone else? Keen exhaled. That call we got, the voice said Renner wasn't alone. Maybe he was telling the truth. Meanwhile, in a dim bar off Jericho Turnpike, a man nursed a whiskey while the television above the counter replayed Renner's arrest. His face was ordinary, brown hair, small nose, unremarkable, but his eyes gleamed with satisfaction. He raised his glass to the screen. You always wanted attention, Charlie. Congratulations. You've got it. When the bartender asked if he wanted another, he shook his head. No thanks. Some of us have work to do. He paid in cash, left a generous tip, and walked out into the night. Back at FBI headquarters, Keen and Linda combed through Renner's employment records. His last 6 months at Farm Fresh Distributors painted a picture of a man on the edge, arguments with supervisors, complaints about pay cuts, and a final note from his manager, dismissed for misconduct. Threatened retaliation. But buried among the files was something that didn't fit, a signed delivery receipt bearing Renner's name dated 2 weeks after his termination. Linda frowned. How could he sign this? He'd already been fired. Keen's eyes narrowed. Unless someone forged his signature. Or kept using his credentials. A lead emerged, Lawrence Kane, a regional logistics supervisor who had approved the document. He'd resigned shortly after Renner's firing and vanished from all known addresses. Find him, Keen said. Now. Renner, meanwhile, was growing restless in custody. He refused to eat the cafeteria meals, insisting they were laced with irony. He joked with guards, quoted scripture about plagues, and occasionally requested potatoes for breakfast, for the symbolism, he said with a wink. One afternoon, Linda entered the interrogation room carrying a folder of her own. We found someone who worked with you. Lawrence Kane. Ring a bell. Renner leaned back in his chair. Larry? Sure. Good guy. Smart. Knows how to move product without anyone noticing. Why? He disappeared. Renner smirked. That's Larry for you. Always hated the spotlight. Did he help you write the letters? Renner's smile faded. Lady, if you think I'm the one writing those, you're missing the point. The system's rotten. You don't need poison to prove that. You just need to show people where their food comes from, and how little they know about it. Linda hesitated. What are you saying? Renner leaned forward. You're chasing the wrong disease. Days later, the FBI tracked down Lawrence Kane, or rather, what was left of him. His car was found abandoned near the docks in Freeport. Inside was a note, typed in the same mechanical font as the ransom letters. Fear is not my weapon. It's theirs. Keen read the note aloud, then dropped it onto his desk. He's dead, isn't he? Linda nodded. Blood in the trunk. No body. Someone's cleaning house. Meanwhile, the media circus raged. Talk shows debated whether the potato poisoner was a lone lunatic or part of a corporate conspiracy. Editorials accused the FBI of incompetence. Grocery chains held press conferences to restore public faith, but the damage was done. An underground rumor spread that the poisoned potatoes were real, that the government had quietly removed contaminated shipments before they reached stores. At first, Keen dismissed it as paranoia. But when a confidential memo from the Department of Agriculture landed on his desk, his stomach turned. The memo confirmed that trace amounts of a chemical compound, ethyl parathion, a banned pesticide, had been found in a small batch of potatoes at a Long Island storage facility. The lot had been quietly destroyed to prevent unnecessary alarm. Jesus, Keen muttered. They knew. Linda looked pale. You think the public version of this story is a lie? He slammed the file shut. I think we're knee-deep in something a lot bigger than potatoes. That night, Keen visited Renner one last time. The room was dark except for a single lamp. Renner looked up from a newspaper, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You heard, didn't you? He said. Heard what? Renner's grin widened. That your bosses aren't as clean as you thought. That maybe they needed a boogeyman to hide their mess. Keen's voice was low. Who told you that? Renner shrugged. Let's just say the truth has a way of leaking. Like a bag of rotten potatoes. Keen stood abruptly, fists clenched. You're enjoying this. Of course I am, Renner said softly. Because for once, they're afraid too. He leaned forward, whispering through a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You can lock me up, Agent Keene, but you can't arrest an idea. And fear, well, fear's already free. Keene stared at him for a long, heavy moment before turning and walking out. The door slammed shut behind him. For the first time in his career, Robert Keene wasn't sure if he was chasing a criminal or cleaning up after one. By the first week of October 1977, Long Island was no longer just afraid, it was unraveling. Grocery stores that once pulsed with chatter now echoed with uneasy silence. Customers who ventured and moved through the aisles like survivors picking through the aftermath of an invisible disaster. Shelves of potatoes sat untouched, their brown skins dulled under fluorescent lights, as if they too carried shame. The FBI's warnings had backfired spectacularly. The more the Bureau insisted there was no danger, the more people whispered that danger must be everywhere. Morning talk shows dissected every rumor with performative solemnity. Late-night hosts joked about potato-proof diets. Housewives held secret meetings in church basements, trading tips on how to spot infected produce. The fear had become a national obsession, and Washington was beginning to panic for an entirely different reason. In a government building near Capitol Hill, a closed-door meeting convened between the FBI, the Department of Agriculture, and a handful of politicians with more power than sense. Agent Robert Keene stood at the end of a long mahogany table, exhaustion hollowing his face. "This isn't just a prank gone wrong," he said flatly. "Someone is using food as leverage. And if this spreads beyond Long Island, you're looking at $1 billion collapse in consumer confidence." A senator from New Jersey adjusted his glasses. "Agent Keene, you're asking us to believe one disgruntled grocery clerk can destabilize an entire industry." Keene's voice was sharp. "I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm asking you to prevent it." Across the table, a USDA official cleared her throat. "With respect, Agent Keene, public hysteria is the greater threat right now. If word of contamination leaks, we'll have riots in grocery stores. We're recommending total suppression of the lab findings." Keene froze. "You're talking about lying to the public." "Call it containment," she replied coolly. He stared at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "You're trying to plug a volcano with a napkin." But the decision had already been made. Back in New York, the fear had grown legs. Reporters swarmed outside every FBI office from Queens to Riverhead. Farmers picketed distribution centers, accusing the Bureau of scapegoating the industry. Conspiracy pamphlets circulated claiming the government was testing chemical warfare on food supplies. One flyer read, "The potato poisoner is a cover. They're testing on us." When Keene saw it, he crumpled it in his fist. "This is getting out of control." Linda Shore, sitting across from him, nodded grimly. "We're getting over 100 letters a day now. People claiming to be the poisoner, people confessing for attention, kids sending fake ransom notes. The real guy could walk through the front door and we'd never notice." Keene rubbed his eyes. "And Renner? Still in custody. Still talking. What's he saying? That he's innocent. And that he knows who's not." Inside his cell, Charles Renner was becoming something of a celebrity. Tabloids printed his photo under headlines like, "Potato Fiend" or "FBI Scapegoat." Reporters compared him to D.B. Cooper, mysterious, bold, impossible to prove guilty. He didn't mind the attention. In fact, he seemed to thrive on it. When Linda came to question him again, he greeted her with a grin. "Agent Shore. The woman who thinks I'm a villain." "I don't think you're anything," she replied. "I think you're useful." Renner chuckled. "That's what my wife said before she left." She ignored him. "You said last time someone else was behind this." "Who?" Renner leaned forward, eyes glinting. "You ever heard of Project Harvest?" Linda frowned. "No. You wouldn't have. It was quiet. Government-funded research on food preservation, chemical treatments to make produce last longer. They tested on Long Island distributors in the 70s. Some of the compounds were banned pesticides, others were, let's say, experimental." "That's ridiculous," she said. Renner smiled. "Then why is your boss getting memos about chemical traces in destroyed potato shipments?" Her breath caught for a second, just enough for him to notice. "Ah," he said softly. "So you do know." That evening, Keene confronted his superior, Assistant Director Graham, in a dim corridor of the FBI field office. "You kept that memo from me," he said. "The one about the contamination." Graham didn't deny it. It's classified. Need to know only. I'm leading this case. Which means you need to solve the extortion, not unravel a government research project. Keen's voice was low, dangerous. So it's true. Graham sighed. The chemical traces came from an old USDA pilot program. No criminal intent. The public doesn't need to know. And if it's the same compound our guy's threatening to use? Graham's tone hardened. Then he's bluffing with something we already buried. Case closed. Keen stepped closer. You can't bury fear, sir. Graham looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, watch me. By Friday, Long Island's panic had gone national. Chicago, Boston, and Philadelphia reported similar threats, letters claiming potatoes there were also poisoned. The handwriting matched, but the postmarks didn't. Either the poisoner had accomplices or imitators had taken up his banner. Supermarkets began hiring private security. Food inspectors wore masks. A woman in Ohio threw out her entire pantry live on television, declaring, I don't trust anything that comes from the ground anymore. Late-night radio turned into an echo chamber of speculation. One caller swore she'd seen black vans marked, USDA Biohazard Unit. Another claimed the FBI was planting poisoned potatoes to justify surveillance laws. The real terror wasn't poison, it was imagination unchained. In a surreal twist, restaurants began capitalizing on the hysteria. A Manhattan bistro offered a fearless fries special, served with mock hazmat gloves. Diners posed for photos holding their plates like trophies of courage. The absurdity of it all almost made Keen laugh, almost. He watched one of the news segments from his office, shaking his head. We've turned national panic into marketing. Linda set a file down in front of him. Maybe it's time to tell them the truth. Keen looked at her sharply. You mean leak it? Not leak. Correct the record. Tell them what was really found in those shipments. They'll bury us both, he said. She met his gaze evenly. They already are. That night, as rain lashed against the windows of the Bureau's Long Island command post, Keen stared at the growing wall of evidence, letters, photos, newspaper clippings, the rotting potato still sealed in its evidence bag. His phone rang. A quiet voice on the other end said, You're getting warmer, Agent Keen. Keen stiffened. Who is this? You should stop digging, the voice continued. Before you uncover something that can't be replanted. Then a soft click, and silence. Keen sat there, the rain hammering the roof above, realizing something that sent a chill through him deeper than fear itself. The potato poisoner wasn't just some deranged extortionist. He was a symptom of something rotting much higher up the food chain. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell over Long Island in a cold, relentless curtain, washing dirt into the gutters and fear into every home. By now, the potato panic had become the kind of story that defined a decade, and Robert Keen was trapped at the heart of it, drowning in contradictions. The calls, the letters, the panic, none of it added up. No one had died. No one had even gotten sick. And yet the entire region was living in terror. It was a threat without a crime. Something about that haunted him. He stared at the evidence board, a collage of faces, factories, newspaper clippings, and a single word circled in red ink, harvest. Renner's voice echoed in his mind, You're chasing the wrong disease. He turned to Agent Linda Shore, who sat beside him in the dim light, surrounded by half-empty coffee cups. Pull every USDA report mentioning Project Harvest between 1968 and 1975, he said. I want every signature, every chemical compound, every subcontractor. Linda frowned. That'll take days. Keen's jaw tightened. Then start now. I'm done waiting for permission. By morning, the office printer spat out over 300 pages of dense government jargon. But buried in the bureaucratic fog, they found it, a contract between the Department of Agriculture and a private company called Cortain Biochemicals Incorporated. The agreement described experimental food resilience treatments, essentially chemical coatings meant to prevent rot in storage crops. Among the compounds listed was one name that made Keen's stomach drop, ethyl parathion. Linda looked up from the page. That's the same toxin found in the destroyed shipment. Keen nodded grimly. And it wasn't sabotage. It was testing. Testing on food meant for the public. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The deeper they dug, the uglier it became. Cortain Biochemicals had been quietly funding pilot programs in Suffolk County, testing new pesticides under government supervision. The tests were supposed to stay confidential, but some of the chemicals had leaked into the supply chain. When reports of nausea and headache surfaced in 1974, the USDA suppressed the data, blaming consumer paranoia. The affected batches were quietly destroyed, and Cortain received another contract, this time with double the funding. Keene threw the report onto his desk. They've been covering it for years. Linda leaned back, pale. So the potato poisoner, he wasn't lying. No, Keene said slowly. He was warning us. At that moment, as if summoned by their realization, a message arrived at the FBI field office. It was handwritten this time, not typed, sealed in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single potato, shriveled, dark, its skin flecked with black stains, and a note that read, "I told you the rot runs deeper. You're feeding on lies." The Bureau scrambled. Analysts tested the potato. It contained trace amounts of the same banned pesticide. Yet there was no indication it had been tampered with after distribution. It had been part of an original shipment. Someone inside the system had sent it. Keene stared at the results, disbelief battling fury. This isn't extortion anymore. It's exposure. His superior, Assistant Director Graham, stormed into the lab. "Shut this down," he barked. "Destroy the sample and all records." Keene stood his ground. "You can't bury evidence." Graham's face reddened. "You think you're a hero? You'll destroy your career." Keene's voice was ice. "Maybe some things deserve to be destroyed." Meanwhile, the media storm was nearing its peak. Anonymous tips began reaching journalists. Copies of USDA memos appeared in plain envelopes at newsrooms across New York. Words like Cortain, parathion, Project Harvest began surfacing in headlines. But every time a paper tried to publish the full story, the article vanished before print. Editors received calls. Advertisers threatened boycotts. Reporters were reassigned. One evening, a young journalist from the Long Island Ledger named Sarah McCall reached out to Keene. Her voice trembled over the phone. "I know what they're hiding," she said. "And I think someone's watching me." Keene agreed to meet her the next morning at a diner off Sunrise Highway. She never showed up. Her apartment was found empty, coffee still warm, door unlocked. Her typewriter ribbon had been ripped out. A note on her desk read simply, "Harvest complete." By now, Keene knew he was being followed. Unmarked cars trailed him home. His phone clicked whenever he picked up. Linda begged him to step back, to let the Bureau handle it, but he couldn't. "This isn't a case anymore," he said quietly. "It's a cover-up." She looked at him, voice low. "Then we need to bring it into the light." "How?" "Through Renner." Renner, still sitting smugly in his cell, seemed almost to expect them. "Took you long enough," he said as they entered. Keene threw the Cortain file onto the table. "You knew." Renner smiled faintly. "Of course I did. I worked at the distribution center where they tested it. They called it a pilot batch. I called it poison." Linda leaned forward. "So you sent the letters?" Renner hesitated. "The first few, yes. The rest? Those weren't mine." Once the fear started spreading, others joined in, activists, whistleblowers, opportunists. It stopped being my message. "What was your message, Renner?" Keene asked. Renner's eyes gleamed with that unsettling mix of pride and bitterness. "That we were being fed poison, not from saboteurs, but from the same people selling us safety." He leaned closer, whispering, "You think this is about potatoes? It's about control. About who decides what we eat, what we fear, what we're allowed to know." Keene's voice was tight. "You could have gone to the press." Renner laughed softly. "And who would believe a disgraced grocery clerk? Fear gets attention. Facts don't." Outside the cell, Linda turned to Keene. "He's right about one thing, people only listen when they're afraid." Keene looked down at the file in his hands, his reflection warped in the plastic cover. "Then maybe it's time they heard the truth, straight from us." He knew what it meant. He would be risking his badge, his career, maybe his freedom. But after everything he'd seen, silence felt like complicity. 2 nights later, an anonymous envelope appeared on the desk of the New York Times investigative editor. Inside was a thick stack of documents, government memos, internal reports, and a signed statement from an unnamed FBI agent. The headline that followed shocked the nation. The potato poisoning that wasn't, government tests linked to cover-up. The revelation tore through the country. Congressional hearings were hastily announced. The USDA denied everything. Cortane biochemicals dissolved overnight. But the damage was irreversible. Public faith in the government's honesty, already fragile after Watergate, collapsed further. Renner, ironically, became a folk hero. Protesters carried signs reading, "Feed U.S. truth, not fear." And in his small FBI office, Robert Keene packed up his things quietly. He'd resigned before they could fire him. As he walked out, Linda stopped him by the door. "You did the right thing," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "No. I just told people what they were already afraid to believe." That night, a news anchor summarized the scandal with a line that would echo through history. "It seems the only thing truly poison was the truth itself." And somewhere in a holding cell on Long Island, Charles Renner chuckled to himself in the dark. "Fear," he whispered, "always finds fresh soil." The scandal hit Washington like a second Watergate. For weeks, headlines screamed from every street corner. Potato panic, government tests exposed. FBI leak ties food fear to federal cover-up. Who poisoned America's trust? Congress moved quickly, not to uncover the truth, but to contain it. Hearings were convened, subpoenas were drafted, and statements were rehearsed with the kind of theatrical precision only politicians could muster. Every department denied wrongdoing. Every official passed the blame. The Department of Agriculture called the tests a misunderstanding. The FBI called the leak an unauthorized breach. And the public, disillusioned and furious, stopped believing all of them. For Robert Keene, it was over. He sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by empty boxes and news clippings. His badge, the one thing he had once believed meant integrity, now sat at the bottom of a drawer, stripped of its weight. The world outside was moving on, spinning through scandal at its usual speed, but he wasn't part of it anymore. Linda Shore visited him one evening, carrying 2 coffees and a file folder. "You look terrible," she said, handing him one. "I feel worse," he replied, half smiling. She dropped the folder on his coffee table. "You should see this." Inside were transcripts from the congressional hearings, heavily redacted, black lines censoring most of the text. But what caught Keene's eye wasn't what was hidden. It was what had been left visible. A single name. Cortane Biochemicals, acquired by Agrinova Industries, 1976. Keene frowned. "Agrinova, that's a defense contractor." Linda nodded. "Specializing in agricultural technologies. They're lobbying for federal funding right now, something called the Food Resilience Initiative. Sound familiar?" He leaned back, realization dawning like a bruise spreading under skin. "They're doing it again. On a bigger scale," she said. Keene rubbed his temples. "So everything we exposed, the documents, the chemicals, it was just the old layer of rot. They've already replanted the seeds." Linda's voice was quiet. "That's what after the harvest means, isn't it?" Meanwhile, public faith in the FBI was eroding faster than ever. News programs painted them as puppets of corrupt agencies. Protesters gathered outside field offices with signs reading, "Fear fed here." Renner, from his jail cell, had become a legend, his smirking photo on posters, his words quoted on protest banners. To some, he was a criminal. To others, a prophet. But one morning, when guards arrived for roll call, his cell was empty. The door had not been forced. The locks were intact. His prison uniform lay neatly folded on the bed, and on the wall, written in something that looked disturbingly like rust, were the words, "Harvest your own truth." There were no fingerprints. No witnesses. No explanation. Renner was gone. When Keene heard the news, he didn't speak for a full minute. Then he said quietly, he had help. Linda nodded grimly. Someone wanted him out before he talked again. Or before he was silenced. She hesitated. "You think he's still alive?" Keene looked out the window at the city's gray sprawl. "If fear's still alive, then so is he." 2 weeks later, Keene received an unmarked envelope in his mailbox. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, grainy, out of focus, showing a man standing in a desert gas station. The man wore sunglasses, a baseball cap, and a faint, unmistakable smile. Scrawled on the back in block letters were 3 words. Told you so? Keene stared at it for a long time, heart pounding. The handwriting, sharp, precise, confident, was Renner's. He turned the photo over again. In the background was a billboard. Only part of the slogan was visible, "Coming soon, Agrinova Research Park, Nevada." That night, Keene met Linda at a small diner on the outskirts of the city. He slid the photo across the table. She studied it in silence. So that's where he went. Or where he wants us to go. Linda sipped her coffee. You're thinking of going after him. He nodded. He's our only link to Agrinova. If the same people behind Project Harvest are still working under a new name, he knows how deep it goes. She frowned. You're not with the Bureau anymore, Robert. You don't have jurisdiction. You don't even have backup. He smiled faintly. Good. That means no one to stop me. As the weeks passed, the official story began to fade from headlines. The hearings concluded without indictments. The files were sealed. The narrative was rewritten. The potato poisoner had been caught, exposed, and discredited. History, as always, chose the more convenient truth. But beneath the surface, whispers grew. Truckers in Nevada claimed to see convoys of unmarked shipments heading to desert facilities at night. Former USDA technicians reported being offered hush money settlements. And every so often, a letter arrived at a newsroom, no return address, signed only with a symbol, a single, crude drawing of a potato. Keene and Linda drove west. They passed through dying towns and endless plains, following a trail of rumors and receipts until they reached the Nevada desert. There, beyond a rusted fence and a private property, federal contractor sign, stood a sprawling complex. White silos, greenhouses, chemical storage tanks, and a logo, the same one from the Polaroid billboard, Agrinova Research Park. Through binoculars, Keene saw men in hazmat suits moving crates into a facility marked Experimental Crop Containment. Looks familiar, Linda said. Too familiar. He lowered the binoculars, jaw tight. They buried the truth under a new name. Maybe not buried, she murmured. Maybe they're cultivating it. That night, as they camped in the desert, the wind howled like a warning. Keene couldn't sleep. He lay awake, thinking of Renner's smile, of Graham's silence, of the truth that kept changing shape every time he got close. Linda stirred beside the dying campfire. Do you ever wonder, she said softly, if exposing the truth actually matters? He turned to her, eyes tired but steady. It does. Even if no one listens, even if it changes nothing, it matters because it's the only thing left that's real. She nodded, watching the embers fade. Then we'd better see this through. Keene looked out toward the dark outline of Agrinova's facility. The lights glowed faintly against the horizon, like a second sunrise, cold, artificial, and wrong. Somewhere out there, he knew, the next fear was already being planted. The next morning, a dust storm swept across the desert. When it cleared, the camp was empty. Only 2 sets of footprints led toward the Agrinova gates, and none led back. Back in New York, a postal clerk sorting the morning mail found an envelope with no return address. It contained a single, typed page. You silenced the story once. You won't silence it again. The soil remembers everything. At the bottom, next to a faint, potato-shaped stamp, were 2 initials, RK. The Nevada sun was merciless that morning. It rose like a blade over the desert horizon, cutting through the thin haze that hung above the sand. 2 shadows moved quietly along the perimeter fence of the Agrinova Research Park, Robert Keene and Linda Shore, weary, silent, and running on purpose more than sleep. The facility loomed like a mirage, silver domes, concrete labs, endless greenhouses glinting in the heat. From a distance, it looked like hope. Up close, it smelled like chemicals and secrecy. Keene crouched near the fence line. Security's tighter than a federal vault, he murmured. They're hiding something worth dying for. Linda glanced at the guard tower. Or killing for. They waited until nightfall before making their move. Under the cover of darkness, they slipped through a drainage culvert that opened beneath the outer fence. Inside, the compound was eerily quiet, no voices, no movement, just the hum of electricity and the rhythmic pulse of machinery. They passed a row of storage units, each marked with cold precision. Lot A, 47, Potato Genome Enhancement. Lot B, 12, Pathogen Tolerance Testing. Lotzi, 31, ethyl parathion research, classified. Linda froze. They're still using it, she whispered. Keen's flashlight beam trembled slightly as he scanned the labels. No, he said slowly. They're not just using it, they've improved it. Inside one of the rooms, behind glass walls, stood rows of plants, potatoes, enormous and pale, their roots thick as wrists, their skins almost translucent. Tubes ran into the soil, feeding the crops from metal canisters labeled with skull symbols. They're building disease-proof food, Linda said, awe and disgust mingling in her voice. Except the cure is the disease. Keen moved closer to a terminal. Its monitor flickered with a government seal. He typed a command, and a file directory appeared, Project Harvest/Phase 2. He clicked the first file. What filled the screen made his blood run cold. Dozens of internal memos, all bearing the AgriNova logo, but each one signed by familiar initials, A.D. Graham. Keen stared at the screen, frozen. Graham, my boss? Linda leaned in, eyes widening. He wasn't covering it up for the USDA. He was the USDA. The next document was worse. It was dated 1977, the year of the original Long Island Panic. Test subjects successfully introduced into supply chain under psychological conditions of public fear. Controlled hysteria ensured media compliance. Results confirm long-term viability of information manipulation through food-related panic. Linda covered her mouth. They used the potato poisoning threat as an experiment? Keen read the line again, voice shaking. They didn't investigate a crime. They created one. He scrolled further down the memo and froze. The final paragraph read, Media amplification was managed through cooperation with key agencies. FBI field team results, successful containment. Civilian response, compliant. And at the bottom, a handwritten note. Fear is the most efficient fertilizer. Suddenly, alarms blared. Red lights flashed. Linda spun around. They know we're here. Keen yanked the hard drive from the terminal and shoved it into his bag. Move! They ran through the sterile corridors as guards swarmed the building. A voice crackled through loudspeakers. Unauthorized breach in Biosector 3. Containment protocol initiated. They burst through an emergency exit, sprinting toward the outer fence. The desert night swallowed them in dust and noise. A gunshot cracked through the air. Linda stumbled but kept running. They dove behind an abandoned truck as searchlights swept across the sand. Keen pressed his hand to her arm. No blood, just a graze. You okay? She nodded through clenched teeth. Go. They reached the culvert just as the first armored vehicle appeared. By the time they crawled out on the other side, the facility lights had gone dark again, as if nothing had ever happened. 2 days later, they reached Los Angeles. Exhausted, filthy, and hunted. Keen's bag still held the stolen hard drive. They rented a cheap motel room and hooked it to a typewriter-sized computer. The files confirmed everything, and more. Project Harvest had never stopped. After the scandal, the operation was simply moved, renamed, and privatized. AgriNova was the continuation, a hybrid between government research and corporate profit. The new phase wasn't about food security anymore. It was about control through perception. One report detailed how fear-based messaging could be used to manipulate consumer behavior, voting trends, even regional economies, all through fabricated food scares. It was psychological warfare with grocery receipts. While Keen scrolled through the data, Linda sat by the window, curtain half drawn. We can't go to the press, she said softly. They won't print it. Not without proof they can verify. He looked up. Then we go to someone who doesn't need permission. She frowned. Who? Before he could answer, a knock came at the door. 3 slow taps. Then silence. Keen reached for his gun, motioning for Linda to stay back. He opened the door an inch. Standing outside, wearing sunglasses despite the night, was Charles Renner. He smiled. Took you long enough to catch up. They let him in. He looked different, thinner, calmer, almost luminous in the dim motel light. You escaped a federal prison, Linda said, still stunned. I was released, Renner replied. Some debts were called in. By who? Keen demanded. Renner gave a small, knowing smile. By the same people who built the lie. But don't worry, they're eating themselves alive now. Keen stepped forward, voice hard. You used us. I warned you, Renner said calmly. You just didn't want to believe how deep it went. Linda crossed her arms. Why help us now? Renner's expression softened. Because even poison loses potency after a while. And fear, real fear, needs to be fed. You're the next crop, Keen. They'll discredit you, erase you, and keep planting the same story until no one remembers the truth. He reached into his jacket and slid a small cassette tape across the table. Play that before sunrise. Then decide what you want to do. Before they could stop him, he walked out. The tape contained a single recording, a phone call dated 3 months before Renner's arrest. A familiar voice spoke first, Assistant Director Graham. Yes, the letters are working. Public fear is spreading. Continue the narrative. We'll announce an investigation once hysteria peaks. A pause. Then another voice, unmistakably Renner's. And my payment? You'll get it once the story runs. We just need someone to blame. And if I talk? Then you'll disappear. Keen stopped the tape. The silence in the motel room was deafening. Linda whispered, he wasn't the villain. He was the prototype. Keen's voice cracked. The FBI didn't chase a criminal. We created one to control fear. They sat there until dawn, the rising light creeping across the carpet like a confession. Weeks later, an anonymous package arrived at several major news outlets. Inside, the hard drive, the tape, and a letter. You wanted a story. Here's the truth. The threat was never poison. The threat was belief. Keen. Within hours, the file was published online. The fallout was immediate and seismic. Congressional leaders called emergency sessions. The FBI and USDA faced joint investigations. And yet, the public reaction was strangely muted. After years of scandal fatigue, the truth barely registered. Commentators called it another conspiracy. Memes replaced outrage. Within a month, the story was gone, buried beneath the noise of the next crisis. Robert Keen vanished soon after. Some said he fled to Mexico. Others claimed he died in the desert. Linda stayed behind, keeping copies of the documents hidden in safe deposit boxes across 3 states. She received postcards sometimes, blank, except for a single stamp in the shape of a potato. She never told anyone what they meant. Years later, an Agrinova commercial aired on national television. A bright jingle played over images of smiling families and healthy crops. A voice cheerfully announced, Agrinova, growing tomorrow's food today. But for a brief second, barely a frame, the screen flickered, revealing a phrase buried in the static. Fear is still the fertilizer. And then it was gone. No one knows who inserted it. No one knows where Keen ended up. And no one, to this day, is entirely sure whether the potato poisoning threat ever truly ended, or whether it simply evolved. Because fear, like a crop, never dies. It only waits for the next season to grow again.